This is an interview with Stuart Cooke, longtime Subud member, helper, um, and opened in 1965.
Yeah,
That's a long time ago.
yeah,
Stuart,
81 now.
can you start by telling us how you found and came into Subud?
Well, Subud found me. Uh, I was at a boarding school and I got kicked out in my senior year.
Oh,
And not for anything serious, but I got kicked out. And my mother put me in a tutoring school in New York City so that I could finish my high school studies and graduate. And the tutor in at these tutoring schools, you usually have you can have more than one, but often you have one tutor who's a master of many things, so he can teach you English, mathematics, everything. And this guy was a great guy. He was a Welshman, and I learned Shakespeare, Alexander Pope. Oh God, we studied great things. And he was huge. He was one of those typical Welshmen with a big chest and very strong. And he became a friend and then a mentor. I was deeply troubled, confused about life, didn't know what I wanted to be or do, and very, very, very unhappy. And he became a father mentor to me. And over the next couple of years, whenever I was in really bad situation, I would go and visit him. And so that was in 1962. And in 2 years later, I was still in the same bad situation, very unhappy. So it's funny because I was very unhappy, and yet I was doing exciting things in my life. I was studying acting and dance, and was with theater people during the day. I worked in restaurants as a waiter, made tips, was able to pay for all my lessons. Plus, I'd moved out of my home when I was 18 and supported myself in a flat in Spanish Harlem in New York. But at the same time, I was miserable.
Hmm.
And so one day I went over. Oh no, yeah, one day I went over to see him, and he had been paralyzed by a half of his body by a heart attack, and he used a method of hatha yoga to bring plus playing a classical guitar to bring life back to this one half of his body, which was still not, the motor ability was gone. And he did it. It was almost completely 100% complete by the time I saw him this particular time. And so he told me about hatha yoga, which sounded really interesting. So I went and I read all kinds of books on it. And I started practicing this thing called controlled breathing, where you consciously breathe in and breathe out every second of the day. And it's fantastic because if you do that, you can control your emotions, which was, of course, my problem. Was I couldn't control my emotions, my extremes of happiness and sadness, manic depressive. And I could control all that and I could function in the world normally. And I got a job that summer at Schaefer's Beer at the World's Fair. And after I'd done this hatha yoga for about 3 months, I was at Schaefer's Fair, and one afternoon there was a situation with a very important person who had come to the restaurant. Schaefer's Beer had this huge cafeteria restaurant. And suddenly, I couldn't control my breathing anymore. There was this pressure that had built up over those 3-4 months of emotions that I'd been repressing with the controlled breathing. And suddenly, all the emotions erupted. And I ran off the floor and started screaming and yelling in the locker room at Schaefer Beer. That was really crazy. And fortunately, the manager of the Schaefer Beer Center was a friend of my father's, and that's how I got the job, because my father was director of public relations for Schaefer Beer, and told him what had happened, sent me home, and said, you need help, and told my father I needed help. And so my father paid for, with his very nice insurance package, paid for a psychotherapist to see me. And at the same time, I went back to my friend, Joe, his name is, by the way, Joe Robinson Jr., the Welshman, told him all what had happened and complained to him because of the controlled breathing didn't work. And he said, well, I heard something about an organization called Subud, Subud, he said. And he said, you go there one time, you stand in front of a bunch of men, and they exorcise you of everything that's wrong with you, and that's it. He said, I don't know much more. That's what I was told. I'm not a member of this thing. I never did it, but that's what I heard. Want to try it? So I looked it up in the phone book, and sure enough, there was Subud, New York, on East Broadway in New York, in Manhattan. And I called up, and they said there were these things they called them probationer meetings, and you had to come every Monday night. And they explained to me on the phone that you had to go to those meetings for 3 months before you could have the experience. I thought this was a one-shot deal. And even then, I didn't, I thought you just did it and went home. So I went, and at that time, there were about 35 candidates and 12 helpers. And so I attended, listened to what they had to say, thought, because I'd done a lot of reading, and I was looking for something, and I had done a lot of reading in mystical tracks of one kind or another, and felt with my, I was 21 years old, so of course I knew everything. I know all about this stuff. And what?
I can relate to that.
Oh, yes. And then a week before, at the meeting before, I was supposed to hand in a slip of paper. When you finish the 3 months, you sign a document that says, I finished my 3 months, and I was started on this date, and I wish to be open. You had to declare your intention in writing. And I turned that into the secretary. Rosanna Ott was her name. And so I turned that in. But at the same time, in this meeting, there was a helper who said something like this, said, Subud is the will of God. Now, he said it, I'm not doing the acting very well. It was much more stentorian and determinative. And I said, that's it, I'm out of here. I'm never coming back, because to me at the time, the word God was just made me sick to my stomach. The phonies in my Protestant upbringing with the priests that I had met, the behavior of the priests had so turned me off to anything to do with Christianity and God. I mean, it just, so I had this emotional reaction where I would flinch and I just couldn't stand it. I'd run away. And I said, well, that's it. You know, if Subud is this, I'm out of here. I don't want anything to do with this God business and with people like this. But there was a guy in the meeting, and he raised his hand, and he said, "I hope it's okay if I say something. I'm a member from overseas," and I just, you know, we didn't know why he was there. All, you know, all of these, we were candidates. This guy was already a member. What's he doing in the meeting? And he didn't explain it. But he said, I would like to say that there is no way you can explain Subud that you until you have the experience. Oh, I forgot to mention the helpers were arguing with one another, literally New Yorkers arguing with one another about what Subud was. And then this last guy, he was the guy who said, you know, Subud is the will of God, and is trying to sum up the arguments. And he said, until you have that experience, you can't know anything about what Subud is. And everything kind of stopped in my emotional feeling. And I said, that's it. I'll turn off my mind. I won't listen anymore to what these helpers have to say. And I'll wait until I get the experience myself. So I turned in my slip. Well, I'd already turned it in. I got a letter in the mail. Dear Mr. Cooke, on behalf of the men helpers of Subud, New York, it's not possible for you to be opened at this time. If, however, you wish to continue with the probationer meetings, you are very welcome to do so. And if at the end of a month you want to join, please resubmit your request for an opening again. Very, very formal, wonderfully written. Sincerely yours, Rosanna Ott, Secretary, Subud, New York. Well, I was furious. I mean, I knew all about this stuff, and now they're rejecting me. I even had gone to one of the helpers and I said, listen, I know all this stuff. I think I should be, this was early before the guy was Stenturian guy spoke. I said, you should, you know, I can be open right away. I don't have to go to all these meetings. And he said, well, I'll check about it on it and I'll let you know. And he came back a few weeks later and he said, no, it's better you go on with the meetings. So now I'm back in these meetings. So I turn off my ears and I wait a month. I finally calmed down from my impatience and anger by the end of the month. And I resubmit my form. I get another letter from Rosanna Ott. Dear Mr. Cooke, on behalf of the men helpers of Subud, New York, we are sorry to inform you that you cannot be opened at this time. But if you know, the same thing, but if you wish to continue, you're welcome to do so. And please resubmit your application form for to be opened in a month. And this time when I got the letter, I was not angry at all. I just was very quiet and I didn't complain. I don't know why. It was really strange. So I went to the candidate meetings, and at the end of this was the 5th month that I'd done candidate meetings, I resubmitted my form and I got a letter back. Dear Mr. Cooke, on behalf of the men helpers, I am happy to inform you that you are welcome to join join Subud and go to the opening. Please contact one of these people and put down a couple of names of men helpers to arrange a time for your opening. So I arranged a time for the opening. I called this guy, whoever it was. And then I remembered this helper who had said the word God, in this way. And I knew from maybe the candidate meetings that they were going to say some words before you're open. We are helpers in the spiritual brotherhood of Subud, and we are here to be as witnesses to your wish to worship the one Almighty God. And I said, oh my God, they're going to use that word again. And I said, oh, please. I didn't believe in God. So I just said, whoever I'm talking to in my head, I said, please not have this person have to say the words, and have someone with a very quiet, gentle voice so it won't disturb me at the time I'm supposed to be open. So the time for the opening came. There were 3 of us were being opened at the same time. And the way we did openings at that time was there were about 50 members in the men's group that night. And the way we do it was that the opening would be done. The members would stay sitting on the floor and wait for 15 minutes. And then somehow it was indicated it was okay for them to stand up and do the lari. So the guy that was saying the words had the quietest, most gentle voice you could imagine. His name is Lucas Mason. And he said the words, and I didn't even hear the word God. I mean, it was just like a gentle rain. And so then he said, begin. And immediately I felt myself falling backwards. And I didn't know where this was coming from, but I felt I was going backwards. I almost fell on the floor. And then I said in my head, oh, this is not real. I don't believe this. So I broke out of Larihan. I stood up and I said in my head, I dare you to do that again. In my head. So I closed my eyes and began. And the same thing happened. And then I almost fell down. And then after that, I started making movements and walking all around the room. And at that, Subud, New York, at that time, we had this building. It was 4 or 5 stories. And there were 2 entrances, one that went through the ground floor in the lobby where there's a social area, and another one that went right to the elevators that went up to the other floors. And I never went into social area because I was scared that this helper was going to come over and speak to me in this dogmatic way. So I would always avoid them, avoid socializing, just go right to the elevator and do my lari. And after the Larihan was over, the first time, I should say, because it happened again and again, when the Larihan finished, I felt quiet. That the storm in my head and in my feelings, my thoughts, which at that time used to go several 100,000 miles an hour, stopped. And I would sit there on the floor waiting because I didn't want to destroy this. It was the first time I'd ever felt peace, except when I was a baby, but that's another child, very young child, 9 months. Well, yeah, 9 months old. And so I would stay 45 minutes. to stay sitting on the floor. And then I would finally go, and my life was a mess. I would go back to my normal, messy, terrible, unhappy, and yet thrilling life. Funny contrast that. I mean, there was so much joy in dancing and singing and studying all of these things. I mean, it was just, doing scenes with actresses, and I had a wonderful acting teacher, dancing teacher, and voice teacher, and diction teacher. It was, oh God, it was so great, and yet I was at the same time miserable. So about 3 months, did the Larihan like this, and avoiding this guy and never talking to anybody else. And then about 4 months later, it was 4 months, I was in a Larihan, and I had an experience with, I was forced into a corner of the Larihan room, and there were lions about to attack me. And I was going back against the wall in the corner. I was absolutely terrified. And then something happened, and the lions stopped moving. It was like a movie, slow motion, in a motion picture, and the film stopped rolling, and the lions were just stuck. And they didn't kill me. And at that moment, I felt something that I became cognizant of in my feelings. Oh, this is the power of God. I said to myself, I knew it. Not only I knew it, it was so strong. And after that, the word God never bothered me again. It went away, that revulsion, and I was able to read Bapak's talks, which I couldn't read because I said, this guy is, a Jehovah's Witness. He keeps talking about God all the time. I can't stand it. So I couldn't read any talk of Bapak at all. So, yeah, I was looking for something, but in order for this to happen, I had to be kicked out of boarding school, blah, 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 the story that I told you. So that's the story.
Good. So what happened later?
Well, I was very lucky. I met two older helpers, a man and woman, who had not had children, who were very kind and invited me over to their home, their apartment, for dinner one night. And they became another set of parents for me. And I ended up going to their home almost every night. I was a bachelor living in my apartment in Spanish Harlem. And I would go over to their home. Lucienne was the woman's name, Lucienne Farkas, and her husband, Ferry Farkas. Ferry was Hungarian, and Lucienne was a Turkish Jew. And they had met in Cairo. No, they had met in Paris in the 1930s. And Ferry, who had been very successful with women during his years as a freelance cameraman in Europe, motion picture cameraman in Europe, and lighting expert, it was very down on the world and didn't believe in the future. And he had sworn to him, he just knew I'm never going to get married, never going to find anyone. So I'm just going to stay single. But he meets this Lucienne in Paris. And to his great surprise, falls immediately in love with her, follows her to Cairo. And later on, they emigrated to the United States and became two of the first helpers in this New York group. And it was in their home that I listened to the first talk of Bapak that I heard. Because on Sunday afternoons, they would invite several people to their apartment every month. And we'd all sit around this reel-to-reel machine and listen to talks, which I couldn't stand, by the way, because the talks, when Bapak would talk, then my mind would start going very fast again. But because there was company, I could never leave. I had to stay until the end. Otherwise, I could have made an excuse if it had just been Ferry and Lucien, and I could have said, whatever. But there were so many people around, I couldn't leave. It would have been really impolite. So I would stay there and suffer because just made my mind go crazy. But then this strange thing happened that for the last 5 or 10 minutes of a talk, suddenly all of that stopped and I would become very, very quiet. But every month, the same thing would happen like that for about almost a year. And of course, by then I was socializing with people at the Subud place, met other people in Subud. And 2 years later, Bapak had said, as in a talk, that one way to find a new helper was that if a existing helper was doing the Latihan and he or she walked by someone who had the capacity to be a helper, he would feel it and then know to talk to that person after the Latihan to find out if they would like to become a helper. And so after I was doing a Latihan for 2 years, my Latihan was changing all the time. Every Latihan was different almost. They would shout and scream, sing, dance, swear. And there were lighter Latihans too, but it was always, every Latihan was like the opening. And so anyway, this helper comes over and tells me this. He says, no, he doesn't tell me that. He says, would you like to be a helper? And I said, what do you mean? I've only been in Subud for 2 years. You want me to be a helper? And he said, don't worry about it. I said, sure, without thinking. I just said, sure. I was 22 by then. And no, 23. And so he comes back to me a week later and he says, okay, you're a candidate. They didn't use those words. You're a helper. And then on Tuesday evenings, we used to have helper meetings every week. One week we'd meet with the committee for a few minutes afterwards and then go about our business. And then 1 week would just be the helpers themselves alone. And after every Wednesday, and then, so the following Tuesday, Ferry and the guy and Lucas Mason would meet with me at Ferry's house, because Ferry was much older, and explain to me what had gone on in the helpers meeting the week before, and we'd talk about Subud. because I didn't, because I had lots of questions. I didn't understand what was going on in the helpers meeting. I didn't know about helpers work. I hadn't read enough talks of Bapak and so forth. I didn't even know where to find it. We had, in those days, we didn't have online, we just had the Peward of this publication that was published in Indonesia, and that only came out every 3 months or so, and there was no place to get ceramah talks. And all the other men helpers were in their 40s or 50s or 60s. I was the baby. And the other helpers treated me like there was not one of them was ever patronizing towards me. It was the most extraordinary thing. They were so warm and generous in their feelings and accepted me as equal. And so that, together with these Tuesday night meetings, which I did for about 4 or 5 months, made me feel more and more comfortable with the group of helpers. And of course, was a great, this was a great learning to be with them on those Tuesday nights, hear their stories, hear their experiences. Both of them had been with Bapak at the Briarcliff Congress before I was open. And so that's how I was trained or educated as a helper.
And what stands out from that experience? How was being a helper for you?
Well, I was scared stiff. I didn't have inner confidence. And I did try to be an assistant to Bapak and attend to the members. I spent lots of time. In some cases, and sometimes it was good. The result was good for the members I was paying attention to. But other times it had no effect whatsoever. A couple of times I know I said something out of place. But it kept me, from a self-interested point of view, it kept me very close to Subud. It wasn't until many, many years later. Wow. I had left New York and I was living in other cities, and then I moved back to New York. And I came to Larihan at the New York group, the current house that they still own, that former synagogue. And at that time, they were about 60 or 70 active members. And I came into the Larihan in New York. By then, the situation, the Sunday afternoon Larihan used to be the most popular Larihan. But by then, the Friday night Larihan was almost as equal. It was, or maybe even more members would come on Friday night. And when I arrived, I'd moved from Boston, where I'd been living, and I was living outside the city in Carmel, New York. which is a suburb. Takes you about an hour to drive in. And I came to Larian on a Friday night. And also I had joined the, I came Friday night, but at the meantime, I had met the local helper. There was only one active one active man helper. And we'd known each other from before. And when he saw that I had joined, he said, please join us for the Helpers Larian every 2 weeks. At that time, been reduced now. It was only every 2 weeks. Please join me, because, I mean, he didn't say it, but I found out later that he was alone, that other helpers would come, but it was very intermittent. And, you know, he was like crying he was so alone. I said, of course. So I agreed. But then on Friday night, when I came to my first General Larian after being away from the city for all those many years, and I came to do the Larian, and I couldn't do the Larian, or it was very difficult because many of the men were sleeping on the floor. And the feeling in the room was just really, really heavy. And so I stopped coming on Friday night, but I would come every Wednesday to be with the helper. And I explained to the other helper, I said, I'm sorry, I just can't do Larian in this group situation. And the helper was very understanding. He said, it's okay, you know. A month later, but I kept trying to do the Larian with the group. So I would come, and so I came a month later, I'd try again. A month later, I tried again. And every time the same thing happened. I couldn't do Larian. And then 4 months later, or 3 months later, I came to the Friday night Larian, and I got there particularly early to get quiet. And so I went into the Larian room about 40 minutes before the Larian started. And so I'm waiting there, and then the men come in. There were about 30 men, maybe more. And we stood up to start the Larian, and I blurted out in my head, I said, Bapak, please help me to do my Larian. And one of the helpers said, begin, and I took off. It was fantastic. I had this incredible, wonderful Larian. And all the other people who had made me so heavy, I put it that way, they were not even there. I could see them in the distance on the floor, but I didn't pay them any mind. I just did my own latihan. And that was the beginning of asking Bapak to help me do my work as a helper, because, you know, as helpers, we're Bapak's assistants. We're not there to help the members. We're there to help Bapak. And Bapak's there all the time, every second. And we can always ask Bapak to help us in anything. And I asked Bapak, and so after that, as my work as a helper, I would always ask Bapak first to guide me. And many times, for example, I would have a feeling to talk to someone, and I would ask Bapak, is this okay? And the answer was, leave it alone. Don't do anything. And then other times I faced circumstances or situations which were extremely problematic and difficult. I had no idea what to do. and something would come. So even though I had done some of that in the years before, now it was much reduced. And I stopped trying to be a helper. So that's how it was.
Have you had many experiences of being around Bapak?
Yeah.
Anything special in those experiences?
Well, they were all special. I ended up, recording Bapak, some 80 talks. So I was always on the stage next to Bapak and Sharif or Usman in the earlier years doing the recordings. And, I'd have to fix the mic. I was scared stiff. I'd have to make sure the mic was pointing in the right direction. And sometimes he'd look down on me at me and kind of laugh at my nervousness and at the whole idea of having to deal with this machine. Every time I went, and I would travel doing this. I recorded talks all over the East Coast and in California, and then assisted at World Congresses. And every time, especially during the times in the many visits that he paid to the East Coast, and every time he would come to visit, the first, I would feel this horrible blackness in my feeling, because I would feel all my sins and I would feel all my mistakes, and it was awful. The first day when I would usually he would stay at least 3 days, and during the first day I would feel this. The second day it would be less, and then on the third day it would all go away, and I would feel okay. My first experience directly with Bapak was in New York, when the first time I didn't meet, but the first time I saw Bapak. And the Larihans were held at this auditorium next to the United Nations. Most of them were. And so on the first night there was the talk, and then the second night there was Larihan. But the space wasn't big enough for all the men. I think they must have been 115 men. Some 300 members in the New York group, and there was so there wasn't enough room for all of us to do Larihan, so we did Larihan in groups. And so I went upstairs to join. I think it was in the second group. And at that time, that was 2 years after I just become a helper. It was 2 years after I'd been opened, and my Larihans were very strong. And I would yell and scream and run, fight. And so we didn't have there was no public address system in the Larihan room. So when Bapak, and it was very noisy, obviously, but all these men were very loud, New Yorkers, like I just said. And Bapak said, "Finish." I didn't hear him. I was on the floor in a kind of Muslim prayer, yelling and screaming. And so I'm down on the floor. I don't hear anything. And then suddenly I'm down there and I feel the touch of something like a feather touching my back. It was so light. And immediately I stop my latihan and look up, and I could see from the body movement that it was Bapak who had passed by when he was leaving the room and had leaned down to touch my back. And the feeling with the touch was, it's okay. You can stop now. It was so gentle and, fatherly. And so that was my first, that was a significant experience for me. When I went to Chilliwack for the 1971 Congress, Lucien and Ferry, my Subud parents, could not go because they were too old by that time. And Lucien had been friends with Ibu Sumari, Papa's second wife, famous Ibu. And Ferry had gotten to know, was also known to Papa because of Ferry was the first professional photographer that took portraits of Papa, and he did that when he came to New York for the Briarcliff Second World Congress. And so they gave me a bottle of Papa loved like this eau de toilette, which is only made in New York. It's a funny creature. It's made out in Long Island, and they've not expanded. They're not international, but it's very masculine and lemony, and it's fantastic. It's lovely. I wish I could buy it in Indonesia, but I can't. The import taxes are huge, and because it's not expensive, but it's fantastic. And Bapak had Perry used to use it, and he'd given some to Bapak when they were there, and Bapak liked it very much. So I brought this huge bottle from Ferry and Lucien to Chilliwack to give to Bapak. And, my intention was to simply, give it to someone in the household, and that's it. But Tootie was there, and of course, and to my wife Marcella at the time, we knew Tootie because, Tootie had traveled with Papa, and we had traveled when I was doing the recordings. And so I went to Tootie, that's it. I went to Tootie to please give this to Papa from Lucien and Ferry. And she knew Lucien and Ferry too. And Tootie said, no, you have to give it. And I said, oh, no, I don't want to bother take up Papa's time. And, with this, he's too, And Tootie said, no, you have to give. She said, come to the house. This was the big house, Papa's home at Wisma Subud. She said, come tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock. And I'll take you inside, and you can give the gift directly to Papa. And so Marcella and I arrived at 11, and at 11:15, there's these back stairs to the big house, and you can hear people going up and down the back stairs. They're made of wood, and we hear Tootie, she was 28 or something at the time, or maybe younger. She comes running down the stairs and she says, oh, I'm so sorry, Papa's delayed. Can you can you wait some more? And of course we say yes. Half hour goes by, she comes down again. Oh, I'm so sorry. Papa's, I cannot, now something came up. Can you wait a little more? So we say, of course. So we sit there waiting. Of course, Marcella and I are scared out of our minds. We are just totally petrified to meet this guy. And but 45 minutes later, Judy comes down again. Oh, I'm sorry, Papa cannot see you today. Can you come tomorrow, 11 o'clock, same time? You say, of course. So the next day we come. And the same thing happens. First 15 minutes, Papa, please. 30, 45. She says, I'm sorry, Papa, can you come tomorrow? We come the third day. And this time, she comes down after 15 minutes. She says, please wait again. But after 30 minutes, she says, you can come now. And by then we had become quiet. We really had become quiet. The excitement, the nervousness, the fear had completely gone. So we go upstairs, and in the second floor in Bapa's house, there's this foyer, not a foyer. It's a sitting room. And the sitting room, it has double doors that lead out to the foyer, large foyer, where other rooms are around there. But it has another smaller door, single door in the back. And so Turi is there. I think Muti was there, her older sister, and that was it. And the sitting room there's like 2 chairs for someone to sit, and then a big chair for Papa over here. And then Turi and Muti sat on a bench-like thing over here, and the other door in the back is over here on my left. And the door is open. So Turi tells us where to sit in front on these 2 armchairs. I'm holding this giant bottle in my hand. And so we wait. And I'm looking out this door on the left, and I see someone, an old man, coming out of a small door. He's unshaven, and he's zipping up his trousers. Yeah. And as soon as this old man gets to the door and steps inside, he completely transforms. And it's Papa. I didn't recognize. And he comes forward and he shakes my hand. He shakes the hand of Marcella, and he sits down. And Turi explained to them why we are here and about I brought a gift. And so stupid me, I think, oh, I'll give Papa the gift like this. And as soon as I start to make the movement forward from the chair to stand up and do that, Turi jumps up from the bench and grabs the gift to take it for Papa. And then Papa says, Turi explains that we are friends of Duchenne and Ferry. and the gift. She explains all of that. And then Papa says, so he says, how many children do you have? And then we explain, no, Papa, we don't have, we just got married a month ago. Oh, Papa laughs. And Papa says, well, Papa hopes that you will have many children. And, you know, he's so casual and so relaxed and so normal. And I start to go like this, thinking that after the question about the children, that we're going to have like cocktail conversation. You know, how was your trip? How do you like chilling, Doc? We think we're going to have that kind of a conversation. And my head moves to say something, but instead I stand up, and Marcella, who's next to me, is doing the same thing automatically. We both stand up, and I bow like this, and we both of us back out of the double doors to leave, and just saying, thank you, Bob. End of interview. And it was interesting, you know, because as an actor, I had studied and played in Shakespeare plays, and I was the one who was told by the director, because I could do it well, maybe because of my dance training, to train the other actors in how to bow the British way, the way you do it. And that was the exact feeling that I had when I was, and I understood, you know, what the origin or source of that movement is, from that experience backing out of the room with Papa. It was so real. And also at that time, I was scared to death of having children. And I didn't know how I would ever do it. My parents had had a very unhappy marriage. I had seen such bad behavior by them and by other parents. I didn't feel that I had the capacity to be a father. And I was scared stiff. So, you know, for the time being, I was not going to have children. That was a decision. So we back out of the room, and we go to the exit to this large house, which it was so large, not because it included many members of Papa's family. It wasn't just for Papa and Ibu, but their whole family were there, and friends who used to stay with them at the house. So it was like a small boutique hotel. It was not a house just for Papa and Ibu. And so I'm at the top of the stairs. There's stairs that go up to the main floor where the living rooms are and bedrooms are. And so I'm standing there, and Marcella and I are next to one another, and we start walking down the stairs. And as we walk, the oceans of the world went through my chest. My chest opened, and there were the oceans, one after another, and they all went through my chest. And then when I got to the bottom step, my stomach closed, and the oceans went away. But the fear of having children was completely gone. And a year, 9 months later, my son was conceived. Matthew Cooke.
Wow.
So, you know, I mean, we know from our reading, maybe we've had friends, that many things used to happen whenever Papa was around. And so that was one of them, one of the many.
Yeah. Do you have any others to share?
Yes, when Bapak died. I was working with Daniel Chaffetz, now Magnus Chaffetz, at his software company in Illinois. And I had worked on the national committee with Ruth Kelly, who had been a great chairman of the national committee in Subud, USA. She had completely revitalized the national office, organized all the files, everything. But she also was a great leader and a great brought under her with a great group of national helpers at that time. That together they brought the whole country together. The country was more unified under their tutelage over those 2 years than at any time it had ever been, or since, in my view. And so I'm working for Daniel, and I'm a senior marketing executive at the company, and I have this huge, wonderful office, and the phone rings, and it's Ruth Kelly, and it's Ruth, and she says, and she tells me the news. So I put down the phone and I run into Daniel's office, which is right nearby. We had about 100 employees at that time. And I tell him, and Daniel follows me out of his office into my office because we can't be together in his office. Too many people are always coming by to. And so I have this big office with a desk and chairs in front and a couch in the back. Daniel sits down in front of my desk. I sit down. And we just sit quietly for about 20 minutes. We let the phone is ringing constantly. We were a very busy company, and we just let the phone ring, and Daniel and I just sat quietly. And during that time, that was 1987, and my father died the same year, 1987. And during that quiet period, I did not feel sad at all. I just felt this enormous quietness with Daniel and I. You know, it was, thank God Daniel was there, because it was so great to experience this news with, you know, a guy who was, you know, a wonderful Subud member and a wonderful person in many ways. And during the time, I suddenly felt this burden lift off that was on my back, and it went away. And I also felt this surge of strength. And I knew at that moment that Bubba would not have left us in night, because, you know, nobody expected it. Everybody thought Bubba was going to live to 100 because he talked about it many times in talks like this. Nobody thought he would die at that time. It was a total shock. And I knew that Bubba would not have left us unless we could carry on. That we had it in us, that enough had been given, and that we had received enough for it to go on. And so I felt this huge surge of not only strength, but of responsibility. I think, you know, all of us as Subud members, especially once we've done the Larian for a while, have a our job is not to do the Larian for ourselves, but to do something so that, you know, the rest of, not the rest maybe, but at least a third, I think Bapak talked about it, you know, at least a significant number of human beings in the world do the Larian. And so, and then later, you know, Baba had given this incredible talk. It wasn't a public talk, but this was in 1972 when Baba had his first heart attack. And at that time, the word spread like wildfire, as the saying goes, and everybody knew, and everybody was worried Baba was going to die. And Virendra, who used to go, was the WS World Subud chair, who used to visit with Baba every 2 months, rushed to Chilandak and met with Bapa in that room that I talked about before, that sitting room, with a few other people. And he'd recovered from the heart attack enough to, you know, come to that room and talk. And of course, the first question on Virendra's mind was the question all of us were wondering, but, you know, we didn't dare ask or send a letter or something like that. And but the question was, well, who, you know, who's going to replace you if this does happen? And Bapa explained that he said, well, there wouldn't be anybody. He said that the Quechuan counselors of each country, as a group, as a council, that they would replace the spiritual side. And they would guide the Subud brotherhood, sisterhood in the future. And the WSA chair and the normal committee roles would take care of the organizational side. But then, in proceeding to answer him, Bapa said, he said, well, you know, when Bapa dies, passes away, he's going to be closer to you than he is now. And at the time, when I first heard about this or read about it or whatever, I didn't understand it. I mean, I understood the words, but I had no feeling about it. But then later, with my experience in New York with being a helper, and when I blurted out the words, you know, Bapa, help me do my Larian, I realized this guy's not kidding. He's really here. And then in this interview with Virendra, he brought it up again, but he brought it up in a different way. And he said, Virendra, you know Bapa talks to you. And sometimes you listen. And you've benefited from Bapa's advice. But he said, you don't listen enough. He said, don't you know that Bapa is talking to you all the time? Meaning every second. All you have to do is listen. And I realized from this that from back when Daniel and I were in the office and Papa had passed away, and from what had happened, about my having children, and many things and my work as a helper, that when I stopped trying to do it myself, I mean, I'm not always good at that. I mean, sometimes I fail miserably because I care too much, or because I think I know too much, because I'm arrogant. I have the answer to this guy's problems, kind of thing, really stupid stuff, but much less. Yeah. So Bubba's here all the time.
Yeah.
So there are more stories, but I think that's enough about Bubba, because I feel Bubba's here all the time. So let's listen rather than me talk.
It sounds like a good idea. It's probably more enough for another interview at some point, but how do you feel about talking more?
Sure, you have questions. I'm willing to speak.
Not sure what I can ask at this point.
Well, maybe it'll come to you. Or maybe something will come to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think this is probably enough for tonight.
Okay.
So up to you if you have something more you want to say.
Well, I just will say the end of that conversation with Varindra at the time of Bapa's heart attack, that Bapa also said. And he emphasized that Bapa is very serious about the large enterprises. That if Subud is ever going to penetrate the world, the only way is through the large enterprises. This is the way that the world will find out about Subud and members will join. Through the enterprises themselves and through real social projects. That is, the things that he always talked about, large social projects, not soup kitchen, but homes for the elderly, mental institutions. I was reading in this wonderful, Subud set up an actual home for boys in England. There were like 50 kids that were truants from the London government, and they were sent to this home, and all of them were transformed. Some of them ended up joining Subud, others all of them ended up having successful lives. All the teachers, the trainers at this home, they were all Subud members. They did latihan every afternoon at 5 o'clock at the home. That was a real social enterprise. That was a real social work. So we, you know, there's this hospital in Illinois. Just today in the news, I read about it, some terrible things, a mental hospital. And, you know, we should have dozens of those, all managed and staffed by Subud members. Look, I mean, the huge impact this could have on people's lives. So this social work, if it's guided by Subud members, if it's guided by Subud staff, who have training in, you know, as Papa said, have training in whatever's required, whether it's a hospital and you have to be a doctor, or whether it's a mental institution where you have to also have training as a different kind of doctor. The addition or the guidance from inside would have just such incredible impact on this world. So Bapa said at the end of this interview with Virendra, you know, what does Bapa need for about enterprises? But you need them, and you need them in order to fulfill Subud's mission in this world. So I will say that that's why I'm in Indonesia. We can get into that at another time if you want. But I'm working on 4 large enterprises, aside from my normal work as a writer and journalist. And those will be coming to fruition in the next 2 years. They're large, so they're taking a long time for the feasibility studies to be completed. But I have no worries about, and they cost money, but it's not an issue. What's important is the ideas are good, and there's a whole team. It's not just me that's working on these things. So that's why I came to Indonesia, was to make these things happen, and especially concerning the development of Central Kalimantan, which Bapak said could be a model of development for the entire world, not just Indonesia. Yeah, I believe all this stuff. It's real. Very, very real. And that's it.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm going to stop the video.
Yep.